and respond to changes through time, and it gives a very practical information on like how to design cities and street networks and adapt to changes. It's a really cool book.
Oh, that's very nice. Wow, and it's even nicer. You could show the cover, right? Undoing Optimizations by Alison Power. Wow, that's interesting. The culture map. Oh, I read the culture map. Ah, Anna. It's Anna. Invisible Women, Exposing Data Bias in a World Designed by Men. Wow, this is a very good one. It's so about just data. Hi from Poland. The Eyes of the Skin, Juhani Palasma. Ah, never heard about that one. From What is to What If, Rob Hopkins. The Just City by Susan Feinstein. Very good. Culture Map I've read. Cities for People. Guys, you don't have to put only urban planning books. You can say any books you've been reading. Sapiens. Wow, these books by Yuval Noah Harari are super nice. Human Metropolis. Towards the City of Thresholds. All right, time is flying. Oh my God, and we are already 3 minutes in. Without further ado, welcome everyone to the third session of our autumn school planning and design for the just transition. We have had 2 sessions so far. The first one was about just resilience, and the second one was about just data, in which we really try to discuss where data comes from, who produces data, what is being used for, and so on, right? And there was a very good critique on the idea of smart cities, which I think we all should really think about what smart cities really mean in the world of today. Continuing with our Just series, we are going to talk today about just space. And today we have a very special guest, also organizer of this event, Caroline Newton. Caroline is a associate professor of spatial planning and strategy. And I know that because that's exactly what I am as well. So we have the same title at the Department of Urbanism at TU Delft, right? We have a very big School of Architecture in TU Delft, and this School of Architecture has several departments. We work in the Department of Urbanism, and we organize a lot of courses. Maybe later Caroline is going to talk to you about the MOOCs that she is leading. There are online courses that are super, super nice. The objective today is to talk about spatial justice. So Caroline is going to give her lecture. I am going to give a very short lecture afterwards just to complement a few thoughts. But meanwhile, please let us know what books you are reading. They don't have to be only books about planning. They could be planning, books about anything. But without further ado, and we have 109 people in the room right now, I'll leave the floor to my colleague, Caroline Newton. Caroline, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Roberto. And thank you for mentioning the MOOCs. I've put already one in the chat, which is the MOOC Rethink the City, which is part of a bigger program of 3 MOOCs that work on similar yet a bit different topics. And I've also put the link to the other one, or to the full certificate, in the chat. I'm more than happy to answer questions if there would be some. But I'll share my screen. Okay, let's see if this works.
Yes.
Okay, Do you see the presentation or the notes?
We see the presentation.
Okay, great. Good. So yeah, what I want to do tonight is just mention a few points that I think are important to think about when we want to discuss issues of spatial justice and injustice. And I want to start with this idea of the American dream. And I guess you have some idea of what it is. So if someone wants to shout, what is the American dream, you're welcome to. If not, then I'll continue, and you can sort of give your own opinion afterwards. But so the idea or the term of the American dream is, it was first used in a book that I've put there by James Truslow Adams, who's a writer and an historian, and it was published in 1931. The book was called The Epic of America. And for him, the American dream is the dream of a land in which life should be better and richer and fuller for everyone. It's a dream of social order in which each man and each woman shall be able to attain to the fullest stature of which they are inattainable capable. That's the quote from the book, and be recognized by others for what they are, regardless of their fortunate circumstances or of birth or position. So although Adams is actually looking for values and a good quality of life, he also saw that quite rapidly the idea eroded. And so today we often see that when we talk about the American dream, it's this belief that anyone, regardless of where they were born or what class they were born into, they can attain their own version of success. And very often success is being sort of used as a synonym for being very wealthy. And that in a society where upward mobility is possible for everyone. And so the American dream is achieved through sacrifice, through risk-taking, and very importantly, through hard work, rather than by chance. Of course, I think we all know that this idea of the American dream is at least a bit naive, at least. Because we know that conditions in which we are born and raised do make a difference. And that these conditions are sometimes able to give you a head start in life, while they can also drastically limit your possibilities. And that is why it's so important to talk about spatial justice, or to talk about space in relation to justice. So before we dive deeper into the concept, I just want to highlight that most of the things I will talk about tonight are based on the work of Edward Soja, a postmodern critical political geographer and an urban theorist. He critically analyzes space in its relation to the social world, and he tries to understand the spatiality of justice and injustice. He does so not merely because of a theoretical interest, but also in order to feed activism and to see how this can support social change. So Soja reminds us that inequalities have always been intrinsically related to space. We all know that cities grew by rivers or at crossroads, and they didn't suddenly appear in the middle of a desert or a forest. Those specific variables linked with the location's geography determine whether that location has greater or less development potential. So in the social science, we have observed what we call the spatial turn. And the spatial turn is actually a paradigm shift that occurred in the late 1980s. It then became increasingly clear that being human is not only defined by time, like we are born, we live and we grow old, we eventually die, but also a spatial thing. Until the second half of the 19th century, space was merely a canvas, a container in which we as humans were active. But today we really acknowledge that space is no longer just conceptualized as this container, but space is a social construct. I will come back to that later. And I've put some names there of some authors like Foucault, Michel Foucault and Peter Sloterdijk. And these authors, amongst others, have argued that more than before, we are living in an age where space is actually overtaking time as a sense-making category. During modernism, time was the central element. Today, in, let's say, a postmodern world, it has become an accessory to space. The centrality of space as an organizing element is clear in the wide availability of concepts to speak about spatial relations, from Deleuze's rhizome to Spivak's margin and center. And following Lefebvre and Foucault, Socha argues that space is the third ontological category, next to the temporal and the social. Today, when we are really experiencing things like social distancing, we can physically experience that all human activities are really taking place and very literally occur in particular places and spaces. And what we also observe is that very often they tend to cluster and they seek proximity. And that is crucial when we are going to discuss issues of spatial justice and injustice. So depending on where you are, for example, when you have to spend or when you have to stay in quarantine, the experience can be very boring, very difficult, or maybe enjoyable if you can sit in a nice garden and just relax and sit there and wait until your quarantine period is over. So this is a very practical experience of the effects of spatial inequalities. So I already mentioned this importance of thinking of spatiality as an ontological category, being not as people, not only social beings or temporal beings, but really also spatial beings. And that sort of urges us to think or to apply a critical perspective that helps better to understand how cities are currently and also in the past have been developing in a very sort of unequal way. And I already mentioned this social production of space. So it's really important to understand that space is not this objective container. And to elaborate a bit on that and to try to explain that, I want to use the work of Lefebvre. And in 1974, I think I put it here. No, that's another one. But in 1974, he writes La production de l'espace, or the production of space. And he argues that space is a very complex social construction. As I said, not something abstract, not something neutral. And I think that Lefebvre's approach is really a very good framework to understand how space is a complex thing to understand. And I want to point to the little 3 circles that are intertwined. And so Lefebvre says you have to understand space in a triad: space as conceived space, as perceived space, and as lived space. And I'll briefly explain what is meant with conceived space and with all 3. But conceived space, there you see the little map there is the extension plan of Amsterdam. And it's a map that when we are working as planners or architects, we immediately understand what is going on. We see, even when it's so small, you see red areas, you see green areas. You know that these red areas are the living spaces, the green are open spaces. So these conceived spaces, Lefebvre explains, are those spaces that have been designed, let's say, or that have been created by professionals, by experts, by people like us, planners, architects. And so in the representation of space, in how they represent these spaces, they also sort of exert their knowledge and their expertise. So the kind of space that is produced from this perspective is very often technical and very often difficult to understand for ordinary people. And more than sort of explaining space as something neutral, which is often thought of, if people talk about a map, they often present it as something neutral. Here is the map of the city and it shows where everything is, but it is not neutral. it is infused with the knowledge and the views and the ideas of the people who made it. And we can explore that further.
Just one thing, are the maps supposed to pop up or?
No.
No. Okay.
No.
That's fine.
Yeah, I'm just spending a lot of time on this because I also want to talk about the other two categories, the perceived and the lived space. And with the perceived space, Lefebvre means it's sort of the spatial practice of people. Depending on the kind of spatial organization, the morphology of the space, the physicality of space, the material design of the elements, they impact how people can use the space. If you live in a development with all roads that have dead ends, yeah, you will not easily be able to crisscross the development. You'll always have to follow the pathways. And then thirdly, and for me a quite interesting one, is the lived space. And what Lefebvre means with the lived space are actually those spaces, although very real and very material, they are also sort of infused meaning that people give to them with certain imaginaries and emotions and experiences and so on. So it's important to understand, to have a full understanding of space, to look at it from all these different perspectives. And that will help you to have a better understanding of how people make sense of their surroundings. So I think that it's a way to try to also understand different ways of how injustices play out. As a planner, you can design certain things and regulations for the development of certain areas, but also in the very practical everyday experience, space can create opportunities or limit possibilities. So in essence, space matters on different scales. And so I have probably been talking a bit in an abstract sense, so let's try to make it more concrete and use an example. So all of these maps show the percentages of people who live in extreme poverty. And we can start at a global scale, and then you will see that in this map, especially the African continent sort of is prominently there, and that in Europe it all looks quite good. Very little people living in extreme poverty, and then you can zoom in and you can take a closer look at a different scale, at the scale of Europe, and then you see already some nuances. And you see, for example, that the Netherlands, it seems to be a place with 0% poverty. And then you zoom into the Netherlands, and then you see that again there are pockets that are jumping out. And then you zoom to Rotterdam, to the city, and there again you see that there are pockets where there is extreme poverty. So what you see rising are patterns of inequality. And these patterns are closely linked to injustices that are embedded in space, or as consequences of the unequal spatial distribution of resources, or the uneven access to these resources. So let's use an example again. And what you see there is an image of or a map of the city of Cape Town. Where you see that there is a concentration of poverty and unemployment, of crime, of poor services in what is called the Cape Flats area, which, as you probably all know, under the apartheid regime in South Africa, different population groups were divided and also spatially segregated according to color. So if you were white, you would live somewhere else than if you would be black or if you would be colored. And very importantly, and a point I want to stress, and I will probably stress again later, is that once you sort of anchor certain things in space, it's very difficult to change. So the apartheid regime that lasted until 1994, they deliberately segregated people across the country, but also within the cities. And how did they do that? On the bottom image, it's just a picture, and you see a road and you see a railway, and you also see two neighborhoods on each side of this railroad and this road. And those are, one of the areas is a white middle class area. The other area is a colored area. And so in order to make sure that people did not meet, you put very strong infrastructure in between. You put a road and you put a railway, and to make the railway safe, you put fences. So you sort of spatially embed an infrastructure that is made to segregate people. And of course, the example of South Africa is very extreme, but you also see it in other places where people are segregated in space. And if you live in certain different areas, of course, you have access to certain resources, or you don't have access to other resources. So when we talk about spatial justice or spatial injustice, a first important aspect is this distributional one. If you want to achieve a more spatially just city, so we will need to think about this distribution, the distribution of opportunities and resources, but also the possibilities to access them. And of course, that is one aspect, but thinking about the distribution alone is not enough. We also need to think about the processes that are underlying certain spatial outcomes. So what I mean here is that we need to think of how the design and the planning process has been shaped. Who has been included? Whose concerns have been addressed? And understanding these underlying processes, especially afterwards, is often very difficult. But I think it's important to expose these kind of unjust practices. And most familiar shaping forces of locational and spatial discrimination will probably immediately understand it's class, it's race, and gender, for example. So we see that in our urban systems, a lot of decision making often happens in a way that it's beneficial for the already stronger groups, while the poor or the already fragile groups are often unequally affected by the policy measures. And an easy example is the corona measures. I think wherever we are at the moment, so wherever we live, we know that the measures that were implemented by governments have been affecting the more fragile people unequally strong, let's say. And spatial planning is a field that unfortunately has been really evolved into a neoliberal practice, often focusing on enabling development, enabling investments, and so on. So city use, large-scale redevelopment, neighborhood upgrading, iconic architecture to compete with other cities to attract international companies, more investors, and high-income residents. So our space very often has become nothing more than a product. And the value of that product is influenced by its location, it's expressed in money, and determining the possibilities for future developments. Other characteristics such as air quality, noise, or smell are intrinsically linked to these locations and often enforce the attached value. Those living in the more affluent urban neighborhoods often enjoy less nuisance from noise or smell or better air quality and have better access to services. The more fragile and vulnerable groups, for example, of homeless or urban poor, have to settle in unhealthy areas that suffer from sensorial disadvantages, amongst other disadvantages. And these conditions affect the physical and mental health of already vulnerable population groups. Edward Soja has explained that being differently located in space can have deeply oppressive and exploitative effects, especially when maintained over longer periods of time and rooted in persistent divisions in society, such as those based on race, class, and gender. The additional effect of these unjust embodied experience impact vulnerable groups' possible emancipation. Also, they influence the city's livability and the attractiveness of urban life as a whole. Today, in a time when cities are still looked at as sort of the solutions for all ills of climate change, for example, and we all go and live in cities much denser, we preserve open spaces, for example, to give a sort of an easy example, shows that it's really important to think about how we are going to, if this is going to be the solution, then how are we going to organize this in such a way that it can provide a good life for all. And I think it's really important that if we want to move forward as a society, we move forward with everyone. We don't only move forward with the strong and the rich. Thus, what we need is a city that is able to create opportunities for all these groups, for all the inhabitants. And if we want to do that, we need engaged professionals who use spatial justice intentionally as a leverage to transition towards a just society. So that means that we need to understand what spatial justice is. We need to understand that spatial justice involves a fair and equitable distribution in space of socially valued resources and the opportunities to use them. We have to acknowledge that social processes shape the spatiality of specific geographies of justice or injustice, and that spatial justice needs urban dwellers to be able to participate openly and fairly in all the processes producing urban space. And I think that when we use spatial justice intentionally as a leverage to a transition to this just city, that we stand a chance. And why do I think that is? Because as I said, once a certain organization is embedded in space, it's difficult to change it. But the other way around, it also means that if we are aware of this fact, that you have spatial inertia, and we intentionally work with this, we can also embed opportunities in space. So therefore, instead of going along with developers and investors and their dreams and demands, I think that's personally, it's our moral duty to examine how our spatial interventions can also create opportunities for all people to appropriate the city in an integrated way. And that's where I want to finish my talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caroline. I got a bit enthusiastic about sharing my books, and I think I was taking a little bit of the attention to your presentation away, so I apologize for that.
No
but here we are. I think a few highlights that I would like to give based on your presentation is the fact that this paradigm shift, I hope everybody understands what a paradigm shift is, right? We have a paradigm, an ensemble of ideas that guide our actions. And this ensemble of ideas is shifting towards space and understanding that space really matters for how people access justice and rights, right? Do I interpret it correctly, Caroline?
Yes, but it's also the case that for example, in philosophy, you will find a lot of authors or books that talk about how life is something that is very strongly related with time. And so they think about our life and the afterlife and the temporality. But there has been a shift to really stressing that we are not only temporal beings, we are really spatial beings. And it's these relations in space, these relations between people, it's spatial. We are embodied beings that relate to each other in space. And of course, we're now in this kind of virtual space, but we're still relating, and those spaces matter. When if we ask, where is everyone from? Where are you? That's a very spatial thing to ask. We could also ask, how old is everyone? But we don't. We ask, where are you? So there is this shift toward understanding how important space is. In order, what we need space to understand what we are as humans.
So Carla is saying that when land has value, so when land is commodified, it's hard to see fairness in city production. What do you think about that? So can we have fairness in a capitalist system?
You ask me.
Yeah.
I think it's I think a lot of things, but I think there are small cracks that we need to make use of, and that we need to appropriate and use those to push and to I think it will be very difficult if you want to do it sort of, okay, from now on, we're going to change the way space is planned and designed and who can have a say. There are changes happening, definitely, but I think we also need to push it from the cracks, and even within, let's call it capitalist developments, we'll have to make sure that we try to almost sneak in opportunities, and an important thing to do that, I think, is not to try to design everything, not to over design, but to leave room for appropriation, leave things that are unplanned so that people can appropriate it, but of course, I also think next to that, it's needed to have some policy changes. And I think that requires a lot of political will. For example, in Belgium, a couple of years ago, there was a law that when you develop more than, let's say, 20 housing units, X% needs to be social housing units. And of course, developers, they went crazy. They said, oh, that's not possible, and blah, blah, and they found all solutions not to have to implement this. But some projects were implemented in that way. Unfortunately, after some time, they took it to court, and so the law was, how do you say it?
Well, that's funny, because here in the Netherlands, you can't have any development, and I'm sure that will surprise quite a few people. But in the Netherlands, you can't have any development without affordable housing. And generally, it's 30% of the housing units have to be affordable housing. And in Amsterdam, it's 40%, because they really are suffering with gentrification over there. Yeah. Maybe something that needs to be said is that commodification of land happens in different ways in different parts of the world, right? In Ethiopia, for example, all land belongs to the government and it's leased. In China, the same. In the Netherlands, we have a mixed regime. So some land belongs to the government, other is private. Carla, I know you have a very Brazilian name, so I'm guessing you are Brazilian, and in Brazil, that's a very big issue because Brazil has lots of private land, right? Okay, any other questions, guys? It's time for questions. So Kuncharia says, would you say that the ladder of citizen participation from Sherry Arnstein, she designed the ladder of citizen participation in 1969, is a fundamental part of achieving just space? Caroline, what do you think?
I think participation is needed, yes. But I think essentially it depends on what you understand under participation and how you define it. You have a ladder, so you know that when it's only used just to tick a box in a development project, I think it doesn't work. Then you might as well not have participation. But true participation is really engaging people from the start. Also being aware that, of course, there are limitations to why people join these kind of processes. I think the work of Jeremy Till is really super relevant in this. He has a very good take on the on sort of the limits of participation and the role of the of also architects, designers, and so in the whole process. So I really would suggest you to take a look at his website. Almost all his reading is freely available on his website. And if you go to other writing, I think you can even select, okay, give me only things about participation. And
yeah, go on. Sorry.
No, I think it's important that he stresses that you have to acknowledge on the one hand that citizens are the experts in their own what they need and in their own life, but at the other hand, as a designer, you're also a citizen, and as a citizen, you also have certain ways of looking at the world or understanding needs. So he makes this very nice, it's not a comparison, but he builds this very nice argument of how citizens are experts, but experts are also citizens.
What I also would like to highlight is that for people in this room, so we are at almost 130 people at the moment. And I'm seeing lots of people from Africa in the chat and a lot of people from the Middle East, from Latin America, and so on. And also from Poland, I can see Carolina. Oh, Carissa is there as well. Oh, lots of people that I actually know from other. When you hear the word participation, maybe you imagine different things. And I think we have to kind of acknowledge that participation is not very common in some countries, right? In Western Europe, also to some extent in Latin America and in the United States, participation means engaging citizens for understanding their needs, but also their wishes and so on. And there are several ways of engaging citizens and several intensities of engagement, right? So what Arnstein, so the example from that was given before from Sokuncharya is that Sherry Arnstein, she kind of makes a taxonomy of the types of participation that we have, and some of them are very superficial, like just consulting the citizens. The ideal would be to co-design with citizens, right? Co-design is really great because then you are incorporating other kinds of knowledge in your design, and you are understanding things that you wouldn't be able to understand otherwise. Especially, for example, just an example, don't be offended, but men are designing most of our cities, but half of the population of the world is women. So we need to have more women designing cities because they know how they want to live, and they know what does it mean to be a woman in a very unsafe city, for example, right? Okay. Any more questions? Is there ways to deal with spatial injustice or a theoretical level? Yes, we are trying to do that with this course. Lots of input in the chat. I'm getting. Another form of spatial injustice occurs when public space is managed by the private sector. Oh, totally, which is more common, right? Which can prevent people from using that same space. A rule in the private space would be the solution for it to be fair. Is that enough? Caroline, what do you think?
Well, Angelica, can you explain what you mean with ruling the private agents?
Hello, good night. Good evening. What I mean it was, is that enough just making rules for the private sector? Or it's not enough? We will not have ever enough rules for them to provide a fairer space, or a fair space, actually, a just space.
Well, I think rules are important. I think politics have also their sort of obligations, or how shall I say, their responsibility. If you look at the political system, let's say a democratic system where people have elected their politicians, it's a representation of those of all those people, and not only a representation of those who are rich and vocal. So I think politicians have the obligation to make rules that allow all people to flourish. So it is part of the solution, but it's only part. I think also in education, in a lot of different, let's call it, sectors, these ideas of fairness and justice needs to be get more attention. And I think if you look at what is happening at the international level with UN agencies and the new urban agenda or the SDGs, for me that is really important, because it also sort of shows that at a world level we are aware that justice and fairness and the end of poverty and so on are really the things that we need to aim for. And although people at the local level might think that is far away, it's not. It's being translated. It trickles down. That there are countries and continents signing. If the Europe agrees with the document, it's translated into European legislation, which is then translated down. So I think we need action on all different levels, not only rules and legislation, but it's definitely an important part, I think. That would be my answer.
Yeah, thanks. Carolina is asking a question, but I am going to answer your question in a few moments, right? Because I'd like to give a very short presentation. Okay, guys, we need to go forward. So sorry if your question hasn't been answered yet. I'd like to just complement what Caroline has said, and I'm going to share my screen now. So sorry for this. Let's see if it works. So let's talk about public goods. One way, so thanks a lot, Caroline. I see people are applauding you with the little icon, and thanks a lot. But Caroline is not going away. We are going to discuss more. Let's talk about public goods. So public goods is a way to understand how can we create some form of justice and some form of redistribution in the city. Why is that? Because public goods are, so I'm going to give you the technical definition of public goods, see if you understand, and then we are going to kind of give examples, okay? So a public good is a product that one individual can consume without reducing its availability. So I consume it, it doesn't decrease to another individual, and from which no one is excluded. So there are two criteria. If I consume it, it doesn't decrease for other people, and I cannot exclude anybody. Only based on this definition, can you give me examples of public goods? And I cannot see the chat, so you have to help me, because now I'm presenting. Only based on this very complicated definition. Can you tell me
I see
examples?
park, air.
Seashore, sea beach or
Air.
seashore. I am leisure. I am taking leisure.
Wait. I can see that. I can see it now. Air, roads, sea. The air. That's very good. Ala, she has been to the summer school before, so maybe the ocean, street lighting. That's a very good one. Sewage, water. Water is not always a public good, I have to say. Sometimes people are excluded from good water consumption, right? Medicine in some countries, that's very good, Mark. Thanks for saying that. The street is a public good. Public part, knowledge. That's a very interesting one, Ettore, because I think knowledge sometimes is not a public good. It depends on the country. Public education, depending, right, on the country again. Safety, Aditi, that's one of the classic examples. Why is that? Let's try to understand public goods using safety. If I create a safe city, so look at this. Let me go to my next slide. This is the city where I live in, and I'm actually quite close to where this photo is taken. I live very close to this forest. Like, this forest is 2 minutes from my house. And it's amazing. Like, I have to say, I'm so lucky to live here. I'm very, very, how can I put it? I'm very, very privileged to live in this beautiful city called The Hague. But in this city, there was a state of security of safety that was created, right? I cannot exclude anyone from the sense of safety because everybody is enjoying it in the city. And if I'm enjoying safety, I'm not decreasing it for other people. Does that make sense? What about freedom? Oh, that's such a good question. Is freedom a public good? Freedom is a right. Whether it's a public good, a lot of people can be excluded from freedom through violence, for example, right? The rule of law. Let's have a look at my examples. The rule of law is super interesting, but let's have a look at my example so you can see. Yeah, Desalina, you are.
Can I want to say something that Ettore mentioned because maybe it will be useful for you. I'm thinking of urban commons here, hence knowledge. That's actually something I wanted to bring up. Are public goods the same thing as urban commons?
They are not. They're very similar and very connected, but they're not the same thing. Urban commons, they are a resource that belongs to a certain community, which means that people who are not in that community can be excluded. And the commons, they are actually, they decrease if you use them. They are a resource, right? So I understand why you make this connection, because a lot of people actually make this connection, but they're not the same thing. Public goods is a little bit more generic to everybody. So I live in the city. I'm very privileged. I enjoy the safety. I enjoy the beauty. I enjoy the green. These are all public goods. But as people said, and I love your answers, sewage systems in places where there is sewage systems is a public good. They're there. Everybody can go to the toilet, and you have to pay taxes for them, but you cannot really be excluded from using the sewage, right? And they don't really decrease with use. What is important for you to understand is that a sewage treatment plant like this one is incredibly expensive, right? So a public good is not for free. It has to be paid for. It has to be paid with tax money, for example. But once it's there, it can be used, right, by everyone. Somebody also said, and that's very, very good, flood defenses. Desalina said that. This is the London, the Thames barrier. It's there to protect London from floods, from storm surges. And once you have that in place, you cannot exclude anyone. Everybody is protected by this. So this creates a public good. I would say that maybe we can make a little bit of a distinction. This is the infrastructure that creates the public good, but everybody needs to pay for this. I have heard people in other countries say, "Oh, I don't want to live in Europe because you have to pay really high taxes." Well, we must find a balance, right? If you don't pay taxes, if you want to pay very little taxes, maybe the quality of the public goods in your area is not so good. If you can't pay taxes because of there's poverty, that's another story. But generally, I have to say to you that governments, it's not that they don't have money to do stuff. There is lack of political will. All right, other examples. Safety, as we said. Of course, the policemen, they're not the public good themselves. You know, policemen are not public goods, they're people, right? But they create a public good, safety, from which nobody can be excluded. Parks, we already talked about that. In some countries, culture and knowledge, like somebody said, in England, most museums like this one, this is the British Museum, are for free. So you can just visit them and don't have to pay, just go in like that. In the Netherlands, they are kind of expensive, the museums. You have to pay 15 euros. That's kind of a big deal, right? A lot of money. In Brazil and in many other countries in the world, this is a vaccination campaign in Brazil. And in Brazil, public health is a public good, but public health is not a public good everywhere, I have to say. In the United States, there is a huge debate right now about, the quality of public care. Well, there is almost no public care, and you have to pay a lot. I love this tweet by Sandra saying, because, with all these anti-vaxxers, people against the vaccine and so on, she is asking, wow, I wonder if people understand why they don't have polio anymore. Because we had massive vaccination campaigns, which created the public good of a world free of polio, more or less, right? I think it's coming back. Domestic garden could create public good. So it's not only the government that creates public goods. You as a citizen, you can also create public goods. In Europe, a lot of our urban landscapes are public goods because they are preserved, right? There is a huge debate about how much can we preserve, how much should we preserve, what is actually the value of this, but they create a public good. The landscape, and somebody said that in the chat, is a public good if we can preserve it, because the land is private sometimes, but the feeling of being in the open air and looking at the horizon, somebody said the horizon is a public good, is also. Caroline and I, we are looking at this slum in Brazil, and we are trying to understand what are the public goods and the governance of this place, and we are trying to understand the commons that people have used and are using and creating by self-help, right? So trying to understand what it means to only count on yourself to create the commons, but also to create public goods. Okay, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley is saying, for years we've funded highways over public transit. 80 to 20 in the United States. Today, our public transit systems are on the brink of ruin. Cities and states need a robust federal infusion of cash to protect one of our most precious public goods, and they need it now. So in the United States, there is a huge debate about how much taxes you should pay, but also where should the tax go, right? I have to say that if you have been to the United States, it's a bit disappointing. The quality of their infrastructure is really crumbling. It's really unbelievable. And you go to China nowadays, I don't know, I know many people haven't been to China in this chat, but if you go to China, everything is new and all the, it's kind of amazing. I have been to Ethiopia recently, and of course, there are public goods being created as we speak. Addis Ababa is changing amazingly fast, and the government is trying to create more public goods, right? OIFA is saying, we cannot accept a world in which the poor and marginalized are trampled by the rich and powerful in the stampede for vaccines. This is a global crisis. The solutions must be shared equitably as a global public good. So vaccines are not a public good yet. This is making fun of American infrastructure by comparing it with the Moscow metro, which is incredibly luxurious and beautiful, while this is a particularly bad photograph. I can tell you that the subway in New York is not this bad, but there are very different kinds of investment, of course, also in different historical moments, right? Using taxpayer money to subsidize industries because of your own policy decisions are disastrous and obscene. Our taxes are for providing public goods and supporting the vulnerable, not bailing out the government for incompetence. Okay, so this is it. I just wanted to introduce this concept. And one thing that I tell my students here is that there is a lot to be talked about. Who creates the public goods? Is it the role of the government to create public goods only, or should private enterprises also create public goods? But public goods, they don't give you profit. So how does it work, right? How can we create public goods not for profit? But one challenge that I make to my students is, instead of starting from the design of the object, why don't you start thinking about the public goods that you want to create? Instead of, because my students, they're very eager to design very quickly, and they go to, okay, I'm gonna design a bridge now, and this is going to solve the problem, right? Yes, maybe it will solve the problem. Maybe we need more infrastructure. Who knows, right? But if you invert the thought and you think, okay, what is the public good that I want to create here? I want to create accessibility. Okay, maybe the bridge is a good. So are public goods good? I think public goods are amazing because nobody can be excluded from them. So they're truly, truly democratic, right? Public goods are not equally available to everyone, even in one city. Sometimes if you live in the center of the city, you enjoy public goods that other people who live in the periphery of that city don't enjoy. So there is a geography of the distribution of public goods, right? I'm saying that because Edgar lives in London, and obviously it depends a little bit where you live in London, you will enjoy more or less public goods. That Carla is saying that's why education should be seen as a public good. Absolutely. I have no doubt education should be a public good everywhere, but it's not, is it? Everywhere. All right. Any questions or comments? Caroline.
Edgar has a question. Edgar is raising his hand.
Yes. Maybe Edgar, say what you want to say.
Oh, I need to ask a question. Sorry, I need to ask a question. So my question with the public goods good is, even within a city center, for example, you have a park with benches, but the benches are only available for people who have a place to go to at night. And that when these people leave and homeless people come there, you're like, oh, sorry, you can't be in this area. So these are people in the same context, same vicinity, but the goods they're good, but there's injustice within them. Same with police and security. when it comes to like issues of racism. Same city, same street, but
Same
because of
police.
same police. Because of difference in color, one person will be denied this public good. So my question then is like, it might be good, but it might also be like injustice at the same time.
Absolutely, you are totally right. I don't have anything to add to that. Even even safety can be racially discriminated. London has this problem that a few of its parks in the central part of the city are not public, they are private. It's kind of crazy to think like that, but it's how the city evolved. And I can imagine that there is a control of the benches. And a lot of cities are using anti-poor design to prevent people from enjoying public goods. So that's another thing. I think we should, yeah, go on.
Yeah, and next to that, you see that private initiatives are also, if you have a nice plush coffee corner in a park, you think, okay, wow, that's nice, let's have a coffee. But it also creates a certain image, and it sort of gives a certain message about who is welcome in that area and who's not.
Yeah.
So you see this kind of encroachment of small private initiatives that also impacts the use of public goods.
Absolutely. So public goods, even when they are supposed to be for everyone, there are ways to discriminate people and to avoid some groups in society from enjoying those public goods. And in every country that we have here represented, that's different, right? I can tell you in Brazil, so I can talk about Brazil. I see lots of Brazilians are in the room. We have a problem with racism. So people of color are discriminated in the public space, so they cannot enjoy it in the same way many times. In Rio de Janeiro, where Hugo comes from, so Hugo is in Rio, by the way, right now. I think, Angelica, are you from Rio?
From Porto Alegre.
Porto Alegre, okay. Hugo is in Rio, and they have this saying that the only democratic space in the city is the beach, because everybody goes to the beach, right? The other spaces are a bit controlled. Any other?
May I ask the question?
Yes, Mariana.
You know, when I see your presentation, there was a Moscow Metro, and I thought about the social.
It's a meme.
Yeah, I understand. The cities during the Soviet period, and the cities, they seem to be like justice cities, because. And I just want to ask the question, what is the difference? Because the politic was just to make people to do their city. There was a big green politic about the green network and transport system, and the willing just to give the room units to everyone. So there was a lot of things about that everybody should have the similar things to do, to eat, to live in, and so on. Yes, but what is the difference now? Yes, there were some totalitarian things that you need to do something, and there was no injured people on the streets. Yes, there was no infrastructure for them, but
Mariana, you are better equipped to answer that question than I am, right? Because you are Russian. I don't know.
So, maybe you know something. Maybe you know the scientists who write about this, because all things you say, they really seem to be a little bit similar that was in USSR.
Yeah. I think the US, from an external perspective, right? So you have to forgive me, all the Russians in the room, because I'm not Russian, so I don't know very well. But my impression is that there was a lot of investment in public infrastructure. There was good investment, but there was also lack of democracy. So people couldn't really say what they wanted or needed, right? So all the voices were silenced, and that was a little bit of a big problem, I think. And also, we know that there was a big inequality between the nomenclatura, the people in power, and the workers, right? So I think Soviet, tell me if I'm wrong, because I'm not Russian, so I don't know, but that's what I understand. So somebody is saying, well, so, you know, public goods are not as good as you're saying, Roberto. Well, the concept of public good is really good. We have to really struggle, fight for them to be truly public, because they're not in many places, right? I think what has changed very quickly, Mariana, in Russia is the rise of private property really super strong, right? So I don't know how to answer your question. So yes, I think public goods are good. That's my position. Is there a way to measure or establish a standard? Oh, the questions are coming. For good public goods, I think you mean, right? Like with public space or quantity of meters. Yes, actually, there are measurements, and you know, that cities should have a minimum amount of green space per inhabitant, but these numerical measurements, they are full of problems, because sometimes they mask the reality. Sometimes the green is concentrated, and you have a minimum amount of green by inhabitant, but it's concentrated. Oh, okay. All right. Are there people with their hands?
Can I say something?
Yes.
Thank you.
Go on. Go on.
Sorry. So I wanted to comment on the same thing about the public goods.
Yes.
It seems that it's very wonderful and nice, and everyone can can use. But in reality, I think it's very different, because when it's controlled by the power or the politics, it wouldn't be like the same as we say. Because as from my experience, because I'm a Palestinian that lives in there's a conflict between Israel and Palestine, you know, and I live in Jerusalem, which is the conflict of the core of this conflict. So so you were saying about the police. So it's the police are taking side with, let's say, with the Israeli.
Oh my God, yes.
So I thought about like a very simple example about the highways. I think it's a public good, but even the highways are designed for a certain group. So
yeah. Absolutely. Oh, let me interrupt you there, because highways are not designed for everybody, I think. Yeah. They're designed for people who have cars. Yeah. But about, so Anna is going to talk about this. Anna is your teacher.
She's my teacher, yeah.
Yeah. Look, the problem of public goods is that generally they are thought for the citizens of a country. I think what is happening in Israel is unacceptable, that the Palestinians have a lesser citizenship. So that's not.
Like, so even in actually, my ID card, I don't have a nationality.
I know.
So it's very.
So that's unacceptable, because you can exclude people all the time from any public goods that you want. Yeah. Based I mean, I don't have to tell you, but yeah, what can I tell you? There should be a certain agreement that public goods should be available to all citizens, but that doesn't happen in reality.
Yes.
For several reasons, right?
Right.
And we know that. And I think in your case, it's more problematic because of the issue of citizenship. I know there are Arab Israelis, right, who are Palestinians with an Israeli passport.
Yeah. Yes.
And the rest of the Palestinians
like
don't have a
me,
passport.
because I live in Israel, so I don't have the Israeli nationality.
Yeah.
I'm a Palestinian that lives in Israel, but in my ID, because they don't recognize Palestine, so I don't have a nationality.
Yeah, that is just unacceptable. It's ridiculous. Yeah, but I'm very happy that you raised your voice, because of course I presented public goods as a good thing, but they have a lot of problems in different parts of the world, right? I still think that we should strive and fight to create them for everybody without, but that's another story. That's politics, right?
Right. Thank you.
Look, I'm seeing a lot of stuff on the chat, and I lost track because there are so many comments. Would you please tell me if you have a question?
There are two more hands, Roberto. Yeah. Abdelrahman and Elias still have their hand up.
Yeah, I'm not seeing that. Abdelrahman.
Yeah. Hi, everyone.
Hi. Where are you?
The Simpsons. No,
yeah, you're in the Simpsons.
Yeah. I'm from Jordan, and I just want to understand the concept of public good. So basically, the idea of public good, it has to be renewable as a source, and also not to exclude anyone. Sorry.
Yeah.
So I think it's embedding the concept of justice. So, but in the other hand, that in case that this public good, but discriminatory policy or something like that, so it means that it's injustice public good. So I think this is to understand the difference, that we have a public good, but also we have injustice public good. We don't have justice public good. So
yeah,
I think that is connected also to the safety point that you were mentioning earlier, Professor, that the BLM movement happened in the US. It's completely the injustice public good of the safety concept, right? This is my first point. And the second point is the question about the the justice. Is it a public good? And the resilience, is it a public good, or is it a result of public goods?
Oh, that's a very good. By the way, I agree with everything you're saying. I think it's a very good point. Resilience could be seen both as a public good and as a result of having public goods, because without public goods, society, it's very difficult that a society can be resilient.
Yes.
For example, I will give you an example. If we don't have good public health is a public good, should be a public good, but it's not in many places, right? And then you have a pandemic. What do you do with the people who cannot access medical care? Do they die? Should they be forgotten? That's why in most places, I know that I think in India, maybe you have to pay to get the vaccine faster, but there is also the public vaccine, for example, right? So, but in most countries, the vaccine is for free, right?
Yeah, the same third. That's true.
Yeah, because they want to create this public good of public health, right? Abdel, let's talk about this more. But you are totally right to think about resilience as a public good, but it also depends on public goods to exist. Okay, so let's go to Elias.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I have two questions about the public good and the spatial justice.
Yes.
The first point is, in what way should we provide and administer the public goods? Since in our case, I am from Ethiopia. In our case, most of the public goods provided by the government. So most of the time, politicians use them as an advantage for their political gains. So I have question on the provider and administrator of this public goods. And the second point is about the spatial justice. Accessibility and distribution most commonly change under the catchment radius, right? So for me, the spatial justice seems to give emphasis on the equality perspective. For example, providing service in equal distance for normal and disabled person, like physical status, it might be equal, it might be provide equality, but it's not justice, right? So how can we differentiate this?
Equality is not always justice.
Yes,
people
so
have different needs.
I think the justice perspective that you provide us was concerned about the accessibility and the distribution of service or any urban fabrics, right? So this accessibility and the distributions are more common on the catchment radius, or provide things equally to every person or geographically accessible way. So it's more on equality, right?
Yeah, but I just want to emphasize that if you only look at distribution and accessibility, that will not be enough. It's also about the processes. Maybe I didn't emphasize it well enough, but it's also of how do processes work, and can they lead to just outcomes? And then we talked, for example, about participation. How do you include, for example, people who are disabled to ensure that their needs are also included? And then I think there's another element that you need to take into account, and maybe it didn't, I didn't mention it explicitly, but it was there in more from looking at from a more injustice perspective. Let's say we're talking about race and class, but that is the aspect of recognition and being aware that you have different groups in a society that you need to acknowledge, and that you trying to embrace this diversity and include that in your thinking and planning and designing.
I think the challenge is to think of people with vastly different needs from our needs, who need to be included in this distribution. Why are we talking about these things with you guys? Because most of you are architects and designers and engineers. Why do we think it's important? It's because when you are working in your municipalities, when Rawan is the mayor of a Palestinian city, she will take decisions that will benefit the whole community, right? And not only small parts of that community. The challenge is to make public goods truly public, and not, as Edgar correctly points out, even if we have safety can be selective, right? Depending on your race, you can feel super safe, and you can be a victim of the police. You can be beaten by the police, right? So all these things play a role. I still think that we should strive for safety for everyone. Okay, guys, we should have an activity today, but we are almost done. We have 10 minutes. So I'm going to put a little example of something related to public goods. It's a little bit of an European, example, but you will forgive me. Just a second, guys. So I put the link to the attendance already twice in the link. So I hope you guys can see it. Otherwise, I'll put it again. So please let me know if you can fill in the attendance list. Okay. Sorry, I'm a bit confused with my computer because I lost one presentation. Just a second. Oh, Jesus Christ.
Can I ask a question while you're looking for something?
Yeah, of course, go on.
So, oh, it was just something we were discussing with Carissa in the chats, and I was
yes, go on. And then I said, you are a neoliberal. Go on.
So it's like how you have resilience produced by public goods, and then look, if you go into any situation, I guess all the context we're talking about now, anything you study is like something that exists. You rarely like study what isn't there, right? You study the hardships or the challenges of everything that's existing. And even with these challenges that are existing, even if you push it like 30 years back, people would always have found something. Like I went to a certain settlement in Dar es Salaam where they had problem with water, right?
Yeah.
But because the area was very waterlogged, they would just, you just dig a bit of the well and the water is there. And they just had to somehow, the problem of like diarrhea and all those diseases was, it had moved from their mind from being a big challenge to being something like, oh, we might get this disease. And so we're gonna, like they have taken it on as something we're gonna just deal with and we can go to a hospital. Like it's become something that is no longer seen as a problem because it's always there. So it is a problem, but it's one that they can already remedy. So they're like, well, I expect my kids to get sick and then I'm going to take this and they're going to get better. But if you go to a community that has never experienced this, the moment that strikes, it's complete like chaos. So
I know, I understand what you're saying. In the Netherlands, we suffer from that a lot because if we don't have a very good government that takes care of everything related to floods, this country would be below seawater, right? So in a way, it's completely not resilient, right? In another way, it is resilient because they have money and they have organization. They have a good. I'm just a bit concerned because this very same argument sometimes is used by people who want to say, we shouldn't do anything because the poor will take care of themselves. And I think that's a very problematic position.
Yeah,
so,
I think it's problematic, but I think to go further, for example, if you've heard of Makoko Village, how they built stilts, the informal settlement that's built on top of water. So if the same thing exists in, I don't know which country it is in Europe, where the city is floating underwater and it is seen as a, ingenuity and like, progress. But when these people in Makoko do it, under that view of let the poor help themselves, whatever they do is then also considered as, like that is poor thinking, poor ingenuity. But from that resilience, of course, we are supposed to help, right? So from the resilience that is created from absence, we, I think, have the responsibility to step in and be like, now we're going to help. Take your whatever resilience you've created and either improve it or tell us what you did or modify it or change it or help. But disregarding, I think, to an extent, if you're in that state, in that village where you don't have infrastructure, you have created something out of nothing, and someone comes and says, this is the other that you need.
That's
resilience.
illegal, for example. Let's take it away.
Or they say that this is, it's poverty kind of thought. Like you disregard it as we are bringing you technology. So what you have done is nothing.
Oh, in that sense. Oh yeah, I think you are totally right there. We have to respect people's ingenuity and the ability that they have to solve their own problems. And we see that with slums in Africa and in Latin America that are seeing like eyesores and problems and symbols of poverty, and politicians want to get rid of them, right? I don't think we should get rid of slums. We need to improve them and make them better. So it's a little bit connected to what Rawan was saying, and a lot of what you were saying, Edgar, is that a lot of public goods are created for minorities. So only a minority enjoys the public good when all the citizens should enjoy that public good. And then it's even more complicated because what do we do with people who are not citizens, like refugees? They also have rights, right? They have human rights and we should respect them. It's a very long discussion. Let me just finish. We have 4 minutes, and I know some people want to stay and chat some people just want to stay and chat with their friends, right? And I will allow you to do that. But first, I want to show this example, and we can debate it a little bit. It's a very European example, so I'm sorry for that. But you know, there is this beautiful city, Oxford. Oxford is known for its, you know, beautiful architecture, super historic. It's very rich, but there are parts of the city that are just like any other part of cities in England, right? They're not very incredibly historic, but they're very nice places to live in. Oxford is a very nice place to live in. Well, what happens when a guy, one beautiful day, wakes up and says, okay, I'm gonna put up a shark through the roof of my house? Does he have the right to do that? But this is a real story. This is real, okay? This is not a montage. This exists. What do you think about this? Does he have the right to do that?
Amazing. Yes,
Yes.
why not?
Why not? I don't know, Inti, tell me. What do you think? Is it nice? Do you like the shark?
I think yes.
Okay. Can you think of arguments why we shouldn't allow the shark to be there? I can't see the chat. Jesus.
I think like he has the right to do anything he wants, but there is some borders that he have to respect because there's neighbors here in the neighborhood. So maybe they don't like the.
Do you say that because you think, okay, it's his house, he can do everything he wants?
Yes, I don't know. Yeah, inside his house, he can do anything. Outside, it's something like.
Okay, so the shark is not outside his house. You know,
I would say no as well.
Okay, who said no? Abdel?
Yeah, I mean, like taking the like visual pollution, it destroyed the identity of the neighborhood with this something. I don't know. It's not. I would say it's no. I mean, he's not free to do that thing.
Well, there's somebody with their hands up. Sorry, before Abdel, there was. I lost it.
I wanted to
Yes.
say that if there are no like city restrictions, if it's not like under historical, like the dwellers shouldn't keep it safe and the same when they come here and just leave it the same. He can do some art, I think.
Oh, so this is public. So you think it's public art?
I think when it doesn't ruin the building, and when it's not a historical building, he can do like, yeah, I think that it's some kind of art.
Okay. Okay, that's interesting. Very good. Carolina.
Hi. So from Polish perspective, I would say that of course he can do whatever he wants in his house. But as a person who works in the Netherlands as an urban planner, I know that that's not that easy, and someone could claim that this person destroyed the value, which is the atmosphere or the climate of the street or a district.
Or the neighborhood.
Yeah, exactly.
So he is interfering. Maybe he's interfering with the value of the other houses around.
Yes, exactly. And so his neighbors, or maybe just whole town can not gain on this act.
Okay. So there are two perspectives, and they are very valid, by the way. One is about property rights and individual freedom. It's my house, I can do whatever I want. And the other, explained by Carolina, is that there is a public perspective that, well, you know, the house is yours, but you can't do everything you want, especially on the facade, because there is, you know, the public domain. I know this, maybe this is not a good example, guys, because it's very European. But in Europe, you can't do everything you want in your house. There are rules about how you have to treat your house and how sometimes what color you have to paint your house and so on, right? What I wanted to do with this example is to say that there is no agreement immediate agreement about something is a public good or something is public art, or when do I interfere with private property rights? We have to discuss, and we have to discuss and find agreements that allow us to go forward, right? And in each case, depending on each culture and also depending on the rule of law, somebody mentioned it, on the laws and regulations of a place, you have to decide based on that. Actually, this exercise was a little bit more complicated, and we would have to really decide based on the laws of this place if the shark would remain or not. I'm going to say something that is shocking, but I'm going to explain it better in one of the next sessions, because today we don't have time. Property rights are not the ultimate benchmark for things. Sometimes property rights can be overridden by the public interest, right? So we have public rights. Okay, this house belongs to me. I can do whatever I want with it. Not really. Maybe you should think about that. This is going to be explained in detail in one of the future. We still have two sessions. I don't know in which one. I don't remember now. I just want to tell you the story of the shark. The shark was built by a man who wanted to protest against nuclear power. He was angry about, thanks Tariq, about nuclear power. And he thought, okay, what can I do really to call attention? And he decided to put a shark in his house, right? And there were the same debates that you guys said, they happened in this place. They were like, oh, okay, it's his house. No, but it's my house as well. It's interfering in the street. I don't like the shark, it's ugly. Some people raised security concerns. The shark could fall. Other people said that it distracted the drivers. So the drivers were like, right? The children loved the shark, as you can imagine. Massimos is saying your freedom ends where mine begins. And exactly, individual freedom has a limitation. The individual freedoms of everybody else on this planet, right? How this story ends is that the shark remained in the city and it became the symbol of the city. It became so beloved that people go there just to see the shark. And in doing so, they raised the commerce, they raised the taxes and so on. So the price of the houses around the shark didn't fall. It actually went up. So yes, the shark remained. It's a bit of a stupid example now, I see, but I really wanted to just discuss this with you. For now, I want to know what you guys, if you have any questions or what you guys want to do, if you want to remain here, because I can give the power to someone who wants to remain, so you can chat. Reminds me of the controversy regarding placing flags behind your glass window of your house. A pride flag would be interpreted. Oh, okay. The capitalists converted a protest symbol in a product. Oh, that's true as well. Okay, can I just, can I close the session for today? I hope everybody filled in the attendance sheet. Did you? Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Carol. I can't see Caroline. Maybe, oh, she's there. I can see her. Thanks, Carissa, for being here as well. That's amazing. Thanks for helping with the chat. Guys, thank you so very much for being here. Next session, I forgot what it is. Oh my God, I'm so tired. I can't remember what it is. Huh?
25th, the 25th?
Yeah.
Just governance, I think.
Just governance. So we are going to talk about governance, and we are going to go back to what's public goods, and we are going to discuss even more. Okay, thanks a lot. I really enjoyed the discussion. Thanks, Caroline.
I'm sorry.
Thanks, Hugo.
Can you give us the attendance link?
I already did. Wait a minute.
Hugo just put it again.
It is there.
Yeah.
So Hugo just put it. Copy
Sorry,
it
Roberto.
quickly.
Sorry, Roberto, before you go, can you define public?
Public.
Yeah, what do you think? What do you mean when you say public?
There are so many interpretations, Edgar. I don't know. What do you mean?
Just for the case of these public goods, because I think I have an idea, but as I'm reading the comments, I think also like with public space and, you know, the facade belonging to the public. So I think maybe what would you say is the public when you say it, when you use it in the context of this?
Edgar, you said something earlier that was really interesting for me. You said, well, you have to really understand the thing based on reality, right? And on empirical observation of a phenomenon, right? But that's what we do. That's what we do. We try to understand things by observing how things work in the real world. But there is another level where you start to conceptualize. So, for example, public goods, they're not perfect. The concept is good, but we have to kind of fight to get the concept and be more close to the ideal, right, of the public good. We know that it doesn't work like that in reality, but well, in some places it works a little bit more than others, and we have some good examples of really public goods in some places. So let's try to the same with the concept of public, I would say. There is a conceptualization of the public, and then there is reality, right? And the conceptualization is public should be all the members of a community. And I mean everybody, children, elderly, Black, white, Catholic, Muslim, doesn't matter, right? We know that in reality, that's not how it works.
So
that's my short answer.
Yeah, I totally understand you. I think in my head, I was figuring out public goods are goods for the public. They're not necessarily goods that belong to the public. Like the government could own, but it is for the people. It's not necessarily the people's goods. Like the people don't necessarily have to own the goods.
Many times they're owned by the government. Many times they are paid with tax money. So they are very expensive actually to create. And in countries where there is little tax basis, it's more difficult to create public goods because where does the action come from? So that's why I am a big defender of taxes if they are employed correctly, which they are not. Okay, we can discuss. All right, guys, shall we close? Let's talk more next time. Thanks a lot for being here today. Thanks a lot.
So
see you next time. See you on the 25th.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye. I'm going to sleep now.
Night.